he was reading my file and he was reading my questions, and he said, how can I help you? And then I just said, you know, for all intents and purposes, Mr. Pena, you can just wipe your butt with that because that's all that's worth. So there I was, Pamela, in the office with the guy who could help me do the thing that I've always wanted to do, but in the moment I self-sabotaged and said, no, we're going to do healthcare instead. And then we had to go through this whole process of me learning more and more about myself through the 4 months that he and I were in business together, to where I finally said, you know what? I have to take a different direction. And
what was that like?
The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the producer and not necessarily those of WKTV Community Media.
Hello, West Michigan. This is Grand Tap Media Business TV. My name is Pamela Keim, your host. The spirit of the show is to introduce West Michigan to all the businesses, nonprofits, individuals that can help us thrive in our lives. Well, today's guest I'm so excited about because he went somewhere and met someone that I admire, I follow, that has helped me grow. But this is going to be one part of the interview is going to be talking about what has built him up. He is an author. He has got a new book coming out, and the book is called The Way Out of Self-Sabotage into Self-Mastery. And he learned a lot of this about himself meeting this person. He probably got a lot of information, which I am dying to hear about. But I want to welcome to the show Hunter Charneski. He is my guest today, and this is going to be part one interview, and we're going to be talking one of two interviews. So part one and part two, right? Interview, but this part one interview is going to be about him spending time with Dan Pena. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He's known as the $1 Trillion Man because he is the best business coach to, I guess, gain millions, have a legacy for your family. And there's so much more I want to talk about, but he's not everybody's cup of tea. And when you first listen to him, you might get a little taken back. But Hunter is probably the closest I'm going to get to meeting Dan Pena and asking all kinds of questions. So I want to welcome to the show Hunter Charneski. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Pamela.
All right, I kind of went a little bit long on that one. I usually try to have my guests say more about that one. But I am excited about seeing you and talking about someone we both have in common. And when I heard that you were at the castle in Scotland with Dan Pena, you were a mentee, he even served on your board, and I almost about fell over. I said, I know somebody that knows Dan Pena, and it's not like he's everybody's cup of tea. If you look him up, people might think he's got very, very colorful language, and he yells a lot and whatever, but for someone like me, he really helped me through a difficult time in 2020 when everything was crashing, and I've been listening to him, and I click on him whenever I have to do a speech, whenever I get down. But I want you to share who Dan Pena is, why they call him the $1 Trillion Man, and what he did for you so that you become this author that we're going to be speaking to today about in part two, your new book.
So Dan Pena is, for all intents and purposes, a financial coach, and he's been doing it for over 30 years now. And what is it? Quantum Leap Advantage is his 7-step methodology to basically, Pamela, teach you how to buy a business with no money.
Which seems impossible today, because we're always worried about getting, am I going to have to buy, plus, really quickly, I hear this all the time. Do I have to put my house up for leverage? Do I have to put it all on my credit cards? Does that make sense? And, or I claim bankruptcy and stuff like that, and I never get, so he really does buy businesses with no money?
With no money. With no money, and I came about this close to pulling it off, but that'll be probably for either later in this episode or part two, as far as how we got there. But that's exactly what he does. It does work. There were times where we were going throughout the process, because as you mentioned, he served as my chairman on my dream team, which is a euphemism for board of directors. And there were times where my son and my wife are looking at me and it's like, how are you doing this? I'm just looking at them. I'm saying, I'm just following the steps.
Right. He always says that, follow the steps. And he gives his information away for free.
Yep.
But there's only a few people in the world that get to go to the castle. So please tell me, how long have you been listening to Dan, and what made you pull that trigger to go and be part of the castle and be the mentee that most people just would only dream of?
I talk about it in the beginning to part 2 in my book. I was off to a rip-roaring start selling life insurance at New York Life, just in downtown Grand Rapids. And I made executive counsel in 6 weeks. And for those who don't know what executive counsel means, it means you make $50,000 in first-year commissions. I did that in 6 weeks. So I was off to a blazing start.
You had a gift.
Yo, and I was actually on my way to my friend Kyle's house in Oconto, which is about 20 minutes north of where I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, for my niece's birthday party. And usually when I go on these long road trips, it's podcasts, Pamela. Podcasts. And I'm thumbing down YouTube while I'm at a stoplight, and I see London Real, Brian Rose interviews $1 trillion man. I'm like, okay. And so I thumb on that one, and as I'm listening to him, the amount of stuff that we had in common was uncanny.
Okay.
He believed in Santa Claus till he was 11, which is the exact age that I believed in Santa Claus until. He was a marathoner turned powerlifter. I was a powerlifter turned sprinter. He really cut his teeth in terms of business and all that stuff, selling insurance. I was having a heck of a time doing it myself at that place and space in my life. And Brian just started diving right in. Pamela, talk to us about your castle. What is going on here? How are you doing this? I mean, you mentioned it. How did he earn the moniker, the $1 trillion man? Because he has helped either directly or indirectly 1 million people become millionaires. 1 million times 1 million is $1 trillion.
And he started this back in, what did he say, 1992 or something like that?
Yep.
He decided he was so successful. He comes from Los Angeles, right? He was a terrible student in school. His father was very rough on him.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a cop. So you got to look him up on his history on that one. He was so bad in school, they called him dunce, or they made him sit in the corner where he wet his pants when he was younger. You couldn't even imagine how embarrassing that is. And then he goes and then he meets somebody, and he wanted to be in the military. I don't know, did he ever no, he did not go in the military?
He was in the military. He never saw live duty.
Okay, that's it. But then somebody came up to him and said he gave him this idea that he could be a million, and he's like, okay, how do I do this? And he actually took action and started doing it, and he was so successful. And he is, if you look him up, there's videos of him. He's famous. He wasn't even knighted at one time.
Oh, yes.
He saved, pretty much saved some of the banks in Europe when they were crashing. There's such a story about Dan, and I tell you, because I've listened to him for years, like you said. So that's what I'm saying. You're as close as I'm going to get to meeting this guy. And then he has this castle in Scotland where he only brings in a few mentees, right? He calls them, and you have to go through the screening. And I want to know, did you have to take the snowflake thing? You know, there's called a snowflake test. You have to take. So please tell me, when you decided you were going to go, what did you have to do to get through all of that maze to be chosen?
So there's obviously a very extensive application process. Yes, you have to take a snowflake test.
And what is the snowflake test?
He's basically finding out how tough or not you are.
Right. I took it, and I don't even think I looked at the results, or maybe I didn't understand them. I should send them to you. Because I was worried that I was a snowflake, right? Because Dan has taught me through all of his things, I like to be liked. You probably realize there's a lot of people that you meet now, you can recognize that. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense.
Okay, so you took the snowflake, and how'd you do?
I was tougher than I thought. And the super success, because there's that one, Pamela, and then there's the super successful one as well.
Yes. And you had to answer tough questions.
Tough questions, and I mean, there was some other strange thing. You had to take pictures of the back and front of your hands and send them to a secretary, and lots of paperwork in terms of, as if Mr. Pena is probing you himself. He wants to know just exactly, well, how was your childhood, and what are your goals, what are you thinking about, all these things.
Were you honest?
Oh yes,
Totally?
I absolutely, absolutely. Because as soon as I heard him speak on that podcast, as I said before, the similarities between he and I were so uncanny that I just thought, okay, I don't care what it takes. I need to get in front of this individual. I'm going to get in front of this individual.
Is that what you thought when
I
you were in
absolutely
your car?
did. I absolutely did.
Out of the millions of people that want to get in front of Dan Pena and be in that castle, I am just saying, when I heard, I thought it was a hoax. Somebody sent it to me that we know.
Oh yeah.
That's that picture of you and Dan. I'm like, this is photoshopped. He did not meet the Dan Pena.
Nope.
He goes, oh yeah, you did. And then we talked, and you said yes. I'm like, ran home and told my husband, and he had all kinds of questions. So I'm going to ask you some of the questions. But all right. So then you went through this process.
Yeah.
And then how long did it take before Dan chose you?
Well, it was pretty quick, but the thing that was really interesting was actually getting him to agree to be my chairman. Or my
How
board
did you do that?
director.
Because he says he doesn't do that very often anymore.
Correct.
He used to, but he don't.
What was interesting is that at the seminar, when I was there, one thing that he said verbatim that I write about in my book is, do not ask me to be your chairman.
Yeah, he says that.
I am stepping out of the chairman business. I'm going to be 80 soon, and then I'm going to be running for parliament. I'm going to retire gracefully into my 80s. If you came here to ask me to be your chairman, you have wasted your money.
I know.
That's what he said.
That's what he said. You're going to be gone.
That's what he said.
know?
That's what he said on day 4 when we were talking about dream teams. He said, do not ask me to be your chairman.
And Dream Team, share with my audience, Dream Team is that he makes you create this dream
Yep.
team to help you be successful. So it's pretty much the most successful people you can reach out to.
Correct.
That
So,
you would know.
Yeah. So, I mean, with Mr. Pena as the chairman of my board of directors, I mean, that immediately just, boom, $50 billion right there in acquisition history for track record's sake. But then I had him. I had the former CEO of Trinity Health as my CEO. I had former Vice President Al Gore's on-call family doctor as one of my industry experts because I went into healthcare. I decided that, I didn't decide, Mr. Pena decided that we were going to roll up home health care in assisted living facilities. That was his thing. His thing was always, if you want to get into an industry, A, you have to know nothing about it. B,
Right.
it's got to be either something that's with incredibly high margins, that's hot, as he would say, and it's going to stay hot until kingdom come, is what he would say. And those industries are telecommunications and healthcare. So when he told me that that's what needed to be done in order for him to even consider being my chairman, I said, okay, fine, I'll do healthcare. And so we went into
What's the start?
What's up?
It's a start.
It's a start.
Right, and if Dan Pena said it and he was on my chair, I would say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
because I have no idea. And he knew nothing about the oil industry when he went into it. He said he didn't know a lot about that. So he shares those, so check out the videos if you want to know more about him. But back to the castle.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get chosen. How many months did that take?
Took a few weeks. Took a few weeks. I probably put in the, I think I put in the, maybe a few months, Pam, I'm sorry. I think I put in the application September or October because they had added they made it like an emergency ad because there was a seminar in October, but we missed the cutoff date for that. But then all of a sudden, Vinica, who is his secretary, sent out an email and said, we have actually just added another date, which wasn't on the calendar before, for the middle of November. And she asked me if I'd be interested. I'm like, yes, let's go.
Right, because he did say he was doing a lot of them, and then he's going to be done. He's already has an end date in mind.
Yeah.
All right, so then you get to the castle. So what was your first experience pulling up the Dan Pena Castle, which is in Scotland, which has a 9-hole golf course, and he talks about a lot throughout his videos. So tell us, what did you experience? Did you walk in? Was it everything you thought it was?
The castle isn't as big as I thought it was. I mean, it's definitely a castle. Don't get me wrong. It is 100% a 15th
Is it
century
like
castle.
15,000 square feet or something?
It's not.
like that?
It's not as big as you think, but it is still intimidating when you pull up and you see this thing. Maybe it's not as wide as I thought, but it's tall, and there's 3 or 4 Rolls Royces parked out in front, and there's little cottages
Right.
all scattered over the company property. That's where we stayed. We each had our own little
Yep, he
cottages.
has all of that set up.
And the butlers were waiting on you hand and foot throughout the day. We weren't in the castle for most of the time. Some people stayed in the castle. I stayed in the cottage. We had dinner in the castle the final night there, but all of the classes that took place, Pamela, from 8 a.m. to 11 o'clock at night were in the pavilion, which was just just a brisk walk away from the castle.
How much access did you have to him? I know if you look on YouTube, he's speaking. You can see people like in a classroom, right? I know you have speakers. He never shows them, which is always a bummer. And those are probably secret, right? But anyway, so how much time did you actually spend in the presence of Dan Pena?
Probably a half an hour total.
Total.
He and I, 100% access. It was 30 minutes before my cab pulled up, because I actually, as fate would have it, everybody who goes there has what he calls private time with him, where you can just sit and do as you and I are doing right now.
Yeah, I saw pictures.
You can ask him whatever you want in terms of how he can help you build whatever you have going on up in here to bring it out there. And that was the only time that I had with him one-on-one, which was the last day, the morning that everybody was leaving. It was 30 minutes before my cab came to bring me back to Aberdeen. It was that private time with Mr. Pena, and that's when I closed him to be my chairman.
Wow, I find that incredible.
And I had to close him. I had to close him because he said initially when he asked me how I can help him, and I said, I brought him through a story and I brought him through my pitch, and I said, if you really want to help me, Mr. Pena, it would be by becoming chairman of my board of directors. And he said, no, I appreciate that, but I'm stepping out of the chairman business. Thank you very much. And I said, I understand, Mr. Pena, but let me ask you a question. What would I have to do to make that no a yes? And he said, okay, when you go home, give me a 500-mile radius of where you're from, Grand Rapids. Let me know what that number is in terms of home health care and assisted living facilities. And if it's a big number, I'm interested.
Was it?
It was a big number. It was just under 8,000.
All right. So you were with him for a half hour. He seems like he would be kind of cold. Was he?
He's on camera at the seminar when he's presenting and speaking. He's somebody else. When you're with him during private time in a one-on-one scenario, he's he's as docile as a lamb.
All right. So then all of a sudden you've been around. You started working with. How long were you able to work with him on the board before you switched gears and decided this is what you want to do, is become this author? Okay. So how long time? Because you were at the castle 2022. All right. So then how long?
December, January, February, March, around 4 months, just over 4 months.
Okay. And then you just realized that, your love for but you write on self-sabotage. Were you worried that you were doing that yourself?
Absolutely I was. Absolutely I was. In fact, one of the questions that I asked him, because there was questions that you had to submit ahead of time as part of the application process for your private time with Mr. Pena. And one of the questions that I asked him was, has QLA ever worked for the arts, specifically authors? And before I got into my pitch with him to be my chairman for my board of directors for the healthcare acquisition platform, he was reading my file and he was reading my questions, and he said, how can I help you? And then I just said, for all intents and purposes, Mr. Pena, you can just wipe your butt with that, because that's all that's worth. So there I was, Pamela, in the office with the guy who could help me do the thing that I've always wanted to do, but in the moment I self-sabotaged and said, no, we're going to do healthcare instead. And then we had to go through this whole process of me learning more and more about myself through the 4 months that he and I were in business together, to where I finally said, you know what? I have to take a different direction. And
what was that like? Did you? I mean, I'm glad you did, because I'm dying to read your book, right? Self-sabotage, because I think we all experience that. We don't see it in ourselves. We think we're doing something when we're, God's calling us. Sometimes we say that when we're actually self-sabotaging ourselves. And I know you experienced. You probably had doubts. But
oh yeah.
To sit there with Dan Pena and just I would have asked him I'm sure he would have read me in 5 seconds. Because people become victims, right? For why they didn't work out. And he says, what excuse are you going to give to yourself that you didn't become more than what you could have become? And I could give him a million excuses, but then Dan's like, yeah, get in line. Everybody's got lines. You can get in that. See how long that line is? Get in that line. And that's the only thing. And I always turn him on whenever I get down. But all right, so You decide to step down from, not go the route,
Mm-hmm.
right, from that, what Dan Pena recommended, decided to become an author and write this book to help others. All right, what brought you to that?
That's a story.
We're gonna have to make it short because part 2 is gonna be
Yeah.
all about the book.
Yeah.
You know, so, but bring it around to when you gave this idea to Dan Pena. Did he ask you, are you self-sabotaging yourself? Did he ask you that question?
He didn't. He didn't. I told him that I needed to, because as I was working through my stuff, it was on January 22nd of 2022, or 2023. So he and I were in business for just over 2 months at that point. And I had gotten so upset one morning that I rolled out of my bed, Pamela, and I walked into my office and I wrote on the blackboard in my office, "Why do we sabotage ourselves?" Question mark. And in order to answer that question, a question that was demanding to be answered, it was staring at me every frickin' day I walked in my office, I had to sit down and do the one thing that I knew could potentially change everything, which was write. And the more that I got into that and started becoming an instrument for him to work through me, then that was where I got more and more and more clarity. And so I finally just, the closer we got to getting a deal done, Pamela, it was as if my soul started feeling an error. And I developed symptoms. I don't know how other way to put it. And I finally just had to make the decision to put God first in my life and go all in on the gift that he had given me and run the race that I should have been running ever since I knew that I was a writer, which was in 11.
And Dan Pena is quite a religious guy himself.
Oh, yeah.
Even though he doesn't proclaim, he was raised Catholic, and he's very brass, you would hardly believe, but he does, I know that about him. He is, I could tell that he is still very spiritual, and I don't know what religion he's practicing, but he talks about being, Catholicism and being Catholic, gives a lot to organizations.
Yep.
So he does understand,
Yeah.
when you're being led to something, because he says, looking at his life, it has to be God's that has touched that kid.
Yeah, but
right?
to answer your question, the day that I sent him that video telling him of my plans, he said, "Hunter, I am proud of you and the decision that you have made. You will no doubt in my mind be a success. The reason why I took your chairman position in the first place is because as the week went on at the castle, I saw myself in you and thought we could get what we needed to get done so then I could retire gracefully into my 80s. Consider this my resignation effective immediately. To your quantum leap in life and business, Dan."
Well, he must have thought something with you. He constantly says that he doesn't want to be anybody else. Don't even ask. You look at his videos, he goes, don't even think about it. And I don't do that anymore. And he said that he was going to only do QLA for a little bit longer, and then he was going to be done. All right, so you have the relationship. I want to really quickly, I know we're wrapping this up, but you met a lot of people. Are you still in contact with some of those people?
No.
No, okay. Which is kind of, is it sad or not? That's just the way the program works. They're just focusing on your mind, because he changes your mindset. I mean, he almost kicks you so hard to get rid of that. It's almost like there's a wall there, correct? To break it down. Okay. So basically, you guys, saw each other, but you never hung out too much anymore. Whatever. Okay, that's kind of sad. All right, all right. Well, to be honest, all right. Now look at what can you share with us before we end this one and move on to your book? Because I really want to get to that. What are some of the things you did learn from Dan that really moved you to completing this book? So there's got to be some things that you learned from him, I'm sure, that just you use it. And are you using it now in your life?
So one of his mantras is just effing do it.
Right, yes.
So a lot of that, especially when it comes to the process of writing. You're going to have about 20 drafts before you have something that you can bring to the publisher when it comes to a book. So just knowing that right off the bat, you're so much less hesitant to make sure that whatever you're doing is perfect, because you've got at least another dozen drafts before you've got something. So it's just effing do it. Just sit down and start writing, Hunter. Who cares? It's probably crap right now anyways. You're going to change it 10 drafts from now. None of what you're writing is going to stay, so who cares? You're just getting it out. Right? But that's definitely a big one there. And then also just like not caring what other people think about you.
That's the one thing. Not being liked, not caring. I will say that was one of the key things. Making cold calls. A lot of us, I know a lot of people that are in sales. They hate that. I go, listen to Dan Pena. Just start making them and just take action.
Yeah.
Action, 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 and don't worry about what people think. And then we talked about this before the interview, the 5 people you hang out with.
Yep.
And it's not like you have to be mean to people that are different, that have a different model in life, right? That's what I would say, a model, they think differently. It's not that, and you can be kind about it, but you just need to be around. And I always tell people, like, I'll honestly say to them sometimes, I can't always be around you guys because all you do is talk about negative, the world's coming to an end. I just can't be there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely does.
You know, do you still use that model? Do you still have 5 people that you?
Yeah, what he would say would be, show me your friends and I'll show you your future.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, there is a bit of discernment that we have to have, I think, constantly when, like, okay, am I around what I would call lifelong caterpillars? People who just don't want to change, right? They don't want to become a better version of themselves.
Right.
Right? And that's sad, but you also have to protect yourself in those places and spaces. Like you said, I just can't hang around you guys. There's this negativity all the time.
All the time.
But it's also what Jesus said. We can't throw pearls before swine.
I know. And it's not like you don't love them.
Right?
It could be your family members. You just have to. I always just used to be, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
I got to move on. If you're at a party, just move on to somebody else. Because people can sit there and drag you down. It's not like you don't care, but you can only do that one. All right. Before we finish this up, is there anything about Dan Pena that we don't know that you might have learned, or just that really resonated with you and say, you know what, this is something I didn't bring up? Because I could bring up, I have pages because I've been listening to them for so long, but is there anything?
It's like the old saying goes, you can't judge a book by its cover. And as you'll see, and when you find him, and if you go look him up on YouTube and social media, you'll see this very brash and vulgar gentleman. He's incredibly passionate about helping people overcome themselves. And
Yes.
that's the way that he does it may not, as you said, be everybody's cup of tea, but boy, does he care.
But he does care, and he does talk about self-sabotaging all the time, that we do it. We do it without even being aware that we're doing it. So I will say that's one of the things, and that's why I was excited about having you on my show. And your new book, we're going to be talking about Hunter's new book, and it is called The Way Out of Self-Sabotage into Self-Mastery. And I'm excited about talking about that in part 2. But I wanted to talk about Dan Pena, which led you to this. Pretty much, you wouldn't be here today.
It absolutely did.
Without that. And I wanted to know what it was like to be at the castle, and you're about as close as I'm going to get. So if Dan Pena is ever watching this, you know what? I'm a big fan, and you have saved me from a lot of self-sabotaging or just feeling sorry for myself. And I said, either I sit in the corner and suck my thumb, or I can just keep going like Dan Pena and take action. And I will tell you, taking action is the only way to get out of things. It may not be perfect, but it leads you to something. And it could be what you've been needing to get done. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And anyways, okay, I want to thank, how can they reach you? We're going to be talking about your book, so where will your book be?
Well, it'll be on Amazon, ebook, paperback, Audible. It'll be at Barnes & Noble.
Okay.
And as far as where you can reach me, I'm on all the social channels. Probably the biggest one that I'm on the most is Instagram. It's just at Hunter_Charneski. Probably the best way to get in touch with me.
Yeah, you can find them. Just look them up, and you got videos out there because you do a lot of physical fitness. We'll talk about that in the next interview and your new book. But thank you, Hunter Charneski, for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And I look forward to talking to you about the book, because we all don't even realize that we sometimes self-sabotage ourselves.
That's right.
All right, this is Pamela Keim from GRTV Media. We will catch you next time. Take care, everyone.